Welcome everyone, anyone that hasn't been here before, for our next innovation series, Changing Consumer Preferences. Just a few health and safety things before we kick off. So we have emergency exits through the back here and doors along the side, and the meeting point is just on the grass patch out here. There are no drills planned for today, so if you do hear an alarm, it is the real thing, so please do leave. Bathrooms are just down the corridor on the right-hand side. There's about 10 bathrooms down there, so you shouldn't be waiting very long. Excellent. Now, in terms of our friends that are joining us virtually, the webinar will be recorded and will be sent out to everyone around 72 hours after now. If you do have any questions or comments or would like to discuss anything, please use the Q&A function rather than the chat function. So anything put in the chat function won't be monitored, and all participants are muted by default. Cool, so it's brought to you by B-Link Innovation. So that's us. You're in our workshop space here. We're all about bringing people together to facilitate innovative ideas, collaborate, and make sure we are living the most innovative life in our primary industries in New Zealand. We are now owned by Lincoln University and a part of the beautiful hub that is Lincoln University. So we're very, very lucky to be a part of such a wide growing network and an amazing part that's so important for primary industries in Canterbury. So this is what we're all here for today. This is Changing Consumer Preferences. We've got 3 amazing speakers lined up for today, which I'm very excited and very privileged to introduce to you all today. Before we do, if you've got social media, I'm sure everybody's on social media in some form or fashion. Feel free to mention us. If you hear a brilliant idea or you think you want to discuss something a bit further, use these hashtags or our handles here and make sure you get social. So, as I said, we've got 3 incredible speakers lined up for today. We've got Samantha White, who is a lecturer in marketing at Lincoln University, who will start us off. Holly Lloyd, who's a senior category manager at Foodstuffs South Island. And we'll be finishing with Hamish Guild, who's the operations manager at High Peak Station. So once they've all had a chance to speak for about 15, 20 minutes, we'll bring everyone up to the front, and by everyone, I mean the speakers, up to the front. So if you've got any questions, either from Zoom or in the audience here today, we'll pose those to our speakers. So first off, we've got Samantha White. So Samantha has spent the best part of the last 10 years studying, working and researching in the areas of marketing and consumer behaviour, which makes her a perfect speaker for today. So she's been inspired by her own personal journey through a plant-based diet, and she's passionate about communicating and increasing the importance and positive externalities of sustainable food. As a consumer and market researcher, her work focuses on discovering market-based strategies to reduce the adverse impacts of our diet and consumption behaviour on the planet and on all of us. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome up Samantha White.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me today. I was going to introduce myself, but I think it's a bit redundant now. It does make me sound very impressive, I must say. So I am a lecturer here at Lincoln, although I originally hail from down the road at Canterbury University. So today I've been asked to talk about changing, or my perspectives on changing consumer preferences in response to climate change and increasing environmental awareness in consumers. And perhaps the biggest trend in this space does tend to be around meat reduction and substitution. So I've been working on a couple of projects over the last couple of years in this space, and so that's what I'm going to share with you today, some of my findings from my research. So in terms of consumer trends, consumers are becoming increasingly aware of the environmental impacts of food production, particularly in the animal agricultural sector, and this has largely been spread through access to the internet, social media, Netflix documentaries and things like that. So the ease at which information is spread is now increasing, and so that makes it more accessible and easy for consumers to be made aware of things like greenhouse gas emissions in relation to dairy and livestock production and things like that. And of course, consequently, that means the demand for sustainable alternatives, or at least those alternatives that are perceived as more sustainable, are increasing in demand. So meat substitutes, for example, were identified as one of the leading trends to disrupt the food industry in 2018. And that goes for things like egg alternatives and dairy alternatives as well. So we are seeing a lot of investment and innovation in this space, and a lot of consumer demand as well. And overall dietary preferences are changing, so it's not just that consumers are incorporating these into their diet in addition to sort of dairy and eggs and meat as well, but they are shifting their overall dietary preferences. We're seeing a rise in veganism in particular, but also meat reduction more generally, so increased adoption of sort of flexitarian diets and things like that. And though a lot of that does stem from environmental concern, that isn't the only motivator. So it is important to recognise that it's not happening in isolation. There are other factors that are influencing these movements and these consumer shifts, depending on sort of obviously the individual nature of consumers. The other one is in relation to health. So particularly for those who are reducing but not eliminating meat, health concern is quite significant, particularly with documentaries like Game Changers, the sort of adverse effects or perceived adverse effects of meat consumption are becoming a lot more widespread. And then, of course, you have issues around animal welfare and ethics too. This is particularly the case for consumers who have eliminated meat completely, so your vegetarians and your vegans. That's not to say that health isn't important for that group or that meat reducers aren't concerned with ethics. It's just depending on the nature of the consumer, which of these is going to be the more dominating motivator. But in most cases, in my own research and research from around the world, it is a combination or some combination of all three of those. So in terms of global trends, it's fairly safe to say that the increase in plant-based eating and meat reduction is on the rise, particularly sort of within the last sort of 5 to 10 years. So even this year alone in the US, 1 in 4 consumers have reported that they are eating less meat. Up in Canada, 60% of consumers have indicated that they are both willing and intending to reduce their meat consumption over the next 12 months. And I think almost 7% have actually eliminated meat from their diets completely. That might potentially have something to do with the Canadian redevelopment of their food pyramid, so they've quite drastically changed the role or importance of animal proteins in their sort of national eating guidelines, and more prioritisation over plant proteins. In the UK, 26% of consumers have reduced their meat intake between 2018 and 2019. And in Germany, 44% of consumers have indicated that they follow a low meat diet. So this is by no means the minority of consumers. It is quite a large portion of people. The clicker's not working. Is the clicker broken?
I think you broke it.
Typical.
If you just pop it down, we can control it from
Okay. At least happened to me and not you guys. Previous slide, please. Yep, and then skip through next, yep. It's a bad time to have animations on my slide. So in Australia, which was a previous one. They are the third largest market for plant-based alternatives after China and United Arab Emirates. And then down here in New Zealand, a third of consumers have indicated that they are attempting to reduce their meat consumption. So it's quite a global phenomena, particularly in sort of developed nations who have typically had high meat diets. And then to the next slide. So I have done a couple of projects, as I mentioned, both on meat reduction and substitution. Our meat reduction study looked at young adults in particular, because while meat reduction is happening across all age cohorts, it does tend to be primarily driven by the millennial and Zoomer cohort. So the study interviewed young adults, and we found what we're calling the 4 C's of flexitarianism. So the first C relates to control, so that's indicating that these, I shouldn't say kids, these consumers are leaving home for the first time. They finally have sort of autonomy over their grocery shopping and the food that's being cooked, and they have more control of what's being put on their plate and what they're consuming. They're also exposed to other ways of eating through their flatmates and sort of peers that they're living with. And so in terms of meat reduction, some of them had wanted to reduce their meat intake at home, but living in a parental household, that was difficult. But now they're able to sort of take control over their diet. So this sort of arose in a couple of different strategies. One was that they would reduce the portion of meat. So rather than having sort of one chicken breast every day, it was like, I'm going to cook one and sort of share it over several days. Or it was taking out and swapping it for plant proteins like legumes or just eating more vegetables. The next C is compromise, and this really refers to these consumers trying to strike a balance. So they're wanting to reduce their meat intake, but they're not wanting to eliminate it. So what is that balance between eating meat and not eating meat at all? And this did vary a lot depending on the nature of the consumer. So we had some people who were going, okay, I'm going to do meat-free Mondays and that's it, right down to those consumers who said, well, I don't cook any meat at home. I only eat it when I'm at friends' houses or if I'm out in a restaurant. And then the next C refers to craving. So because they were reducing meat, their perceptions of meat and the role it took in their diets changed. So it was no longer seen as an everyday food. It was now something that was perceived as a treat. If anyone's ever tried to reduce the treats they eat, like I have, you do start craving them. So they talked about how they weren't reducing meat intake because they didn't like eating it, they didn't like the taste. They did like the way that it tasted, and so they found that they were craving it to some extent because they had reduced how much they were eating, particularly in social situations or when they are eating out at restaurants, being around other people who are eating meat. Then obviously that sort of elicited more craving from those consumers as well. And then the final C is concern, and this relates to those sort of 3 key motivations I talked to earlier. So we did find this to be the case in our sample as well. So concern for the environment, their health and ethics in no sort of particular order. And that concern was initially driven by talking with peers or reading articles on social media and Netflix documentaries and stuff. So it is those sort of personal online and offline interactions that are sort of sparking this concern in these consumers. And that in turn is then motivating them to sort of explore meat reduction in their own diets. But this concern also relates to variety. So a lot of people, like myself, sort of grew up on the meat and 3 veg format for dinner. And once they had left the parental home and sort of experimented with different styles of cooking and different ingredients, they said that, well, actually, this new way of eating has enabled me to incorporate more variety into my diet because I'm eating cuisines from different parts of the world. I'm experimenting with new vegetables I've never even heard of or eaten before, and different types of protein. So it was in relation to variety as well. So that was on meat reduction, and it was quite a sort of specific study. The other one on meat substitution, this was a lot more broad. So I had a much broader sample. I included anyone over the age of 18. So I think my oldest participant was about 60. And it also included a range of different types of consumers. So it wasn't just reducers, it was vegans, vegetarians, but also consumers who weren't even trying to reduce their meat intake. So those who were sort of diehard omnivores as well. And my findings indicated sort of 4 key groups of factors that were sort of inhibiting or driving the adoption of these products. So the first one are those marketing factors, and these are like your 4 Ps, essentially those factors that are controlled by the organisation or the marketer. So the price that's set, the distribution channels and how easy or difficult it is for consumers to gain access, how intensely it was promoted, whether the packaging was sustainable, and of course the product itself, so whether it tasted good and it was easy to use. The next group of factors are individual factors, so those that relate to the individual consumer, their perceptions of meat and meat substitutes, their values, so their health, environmental and ethical concern, quite distinct gender differences as well, cooking competency, so how confident they were cooking for themselves and how much they relied on prepackaged products, and of course their lifestyle too, so whether they were yo-pros cooking for themselves or whether they had families and sort of how many people and what kind of lifestyle they were living. Third group, social factors. This is quite an interesting one and does also reflect the findings from the earlier study. Stigma, that really was quite interesting in that it relates to the stigma associated particularly with veganism. We do cop a lot of flack. And just sort of general stigma around reduced meat eating, and they found that these products actually help to reduce that. So by being able to turn up to a barbecue with my veggie burgers, it looks normal, it doesn't look like weird food that no one's ever seen before. I can take that to my friends and sort of still engage in those social interactions and not look like a freak. And then family, so how they'd been brought up and what kind of culinary skills they developed in the home, and also their networks. So as I mentioned in the previous study, those online and offline networks were how they were learning about new information, which supermarkets were stocking products, and sort of reviews on different types of products as well. And the last group were those situational factors. So those that actually relate to this specific dining situation, so whether they were eating out and the restaurant or takeaway chain were using these products. We are seeing that more in the likes of Hell Pizza and Burger Fuel. Convenience, so how convenient the product was to use, was something that required a lot of prep or something that could just shove in a frying pan and be done with it. Suitability, so the suitability for the individual meal. So if I'm cooking spag bowl, is a product I've bought suitable for that, or is it more for burgers or sausages or nuggets or those kinds of things? And then seasonality, so that was quite interesting too, and that because these products are primarily used in social situations, obviously in New Zealand over summer, we're entertaining more, we've got barbecues, Christmases, a lot more social gatherings, and so these products, consumers communicated that they were purchasing them more during the summer months, because even if vegans and vegetarians weren't buying them for themselves, they would buy them when they were going to eat with others, because it just made it more normal. And then the next slide, please. So in terms of product innovations within the meat substitute market, it's probably a lot bigger than I think most people appreciate, and a lot more diversified than at least I initially anticipated. And these can be broken up into 3 groups. So the first group is plant-based, and this is by far the biggest portion of these products. And that is essentially products that are made exclusively from plant sources, so like soy and beans and pea. And this can further be broken into 3 categories. So the first one is similar to meat. And those are things like your Beyond Burger, your Impossible Burger. They have been specifically designed to replicate meat in terms of the sensory qualities, so taste, texture, smell, how it cooks, whether it bleeds, and the function as well, and then not similar to meat. So things like Bean Supreme do really well. They might have the form of a burger patty, so it might be like a round disc, but it's not really trying to pretend that it's meat. It's pretty obvious it's made from beans or peas or chickpeas, but that also includes things like tofu, tempeh, and seitan. And then the last one there is natural mimics. So these are those fruits and vegetables that occur naturally, so like jackfruit. banana blossom, and your specialty mushrooms, so like king oyster mushrooms and things that are sold because they can be used to replicate meat in terms of the texture or adding something a bit chewy to the dish. The next group are cell-based meats. So if you're not familiar with this, these are sort of cultured or in vitro meats. They are genetically the same as actual animal flesh. It's just that it's been developed outside of an animal body. So they take a biopsy and then they can grow specific cuts of meat in a dish. Lot of investment in this area. We've seen them in pork, chicken, fish, seafood, steak, duck as well, I think. And there's a lot of big money in terms of investment in this area. And the only barrier to this becoming market ready really at the moment is just scalability. So trying to bring the costs down and increase scale of production for the mass market. But I hope we see that in the next few years. And then the last group are animal-based. This isn't really a formal categorization, it's more just a catch-all for all the other stuff that doesn't fit into the other two. And this is by far the smallest group. So this includes things like insects, so your cricket flour or your whole insects as a protein. It also includes those things like vegetarian, so plant-based does mean only plants. Vegetarian, if it's still including egg proteins or dairy proteins, doesn't technically fit into that group, so those products there too. And also blended, so this one I haven't seen many of. I think there was one in New Zealand and maybe one in the US, and this is literally just meat blended with something else. So aimed at sort of flexitarians, and it's a sausage with pork and oats in it or something like that. So not a lot of those. I'm not sure how successful that one is, but this is sort of the smallest group there as well. Cool, and in terms of opportunities in this area, I sort of see four main areas. The first one's obviously around crop production. So obviously as demand for these products is increasing, that also increases demand for the inputs that are going into the products. In New Zealand, we have a good reputation for our farming practices, and I don't see why that can't be leveraged in terms of creating really high quality inputs and high quality meat substitutes. Most of them are around soy, vast majority are soy, but also things like wheat or pea, and then also things like quinoa and oats are also used. Manufacturing, obviously, we have a couple in New Zealand, like Sunfeed and Food Nation and Craft Meat Co. A lot of them are around mince, so ground meat style products, but actually most of the demand is forecast to, in the coming years, be around poultry style products. So we only have Sunfeed at the moment, I believe, that are doing that, but there is a lot more demand coming for those chicken style products, just because the meat market is also shifting more towards, away from red meat towards white meat as well. Next one, obviously retailing and service. So that's obviously how consumers are actually gaining access to these products. We're seeing brands like KFC, Burger King, Hell Pizza, Burgerful using these products in their menu with quite a lot of success. And we're also seeing a lot of service industry, sort of hospitality, a lot of restaurants incorporating them into their meals. And also retailing like New World as well is particularly good at sourcing these products. And if you are vegan, you know that Durham Street New World is the place to go. And then the last one there is related product categories. So I have obviously just talked about meat, but this obviously has implications for things like dairy and egg substitutes too. So it's all kind of related, and as demand for one's increasing, so are the others. And that's all, that's me. If you would like to connect, please feel free to do so. But otherwise, thank you for lending me your eyes and ears.
Thank you so much for that, Sam. It's amazing to think even 15 years ago, it would be not very common that you'd come across someone who had who led a plant-based diet or a vegan diet, and how that's completely changed. And more often than not, you're finding people who subscribe to a diet of some description that's alternative from the traditional meat and 3 veg situation. Thank you so much for that. Next, we've got Holly Lloyd, who's a Senior Category Manager at Foodstuffs South Island. So Holly is a young rising leader and is a Senior Category Manager for groceries at Foodstuffs. She's been there for 3 years and started her career as a wholesale produce buyer and then quickly moved into the category team before becoming a Senior Category Manager. She drives and oversees category growth in a number of categories. Don't hold it against her, but she did study at Otago University and holds a Bachelor of Science in Consumer Food Science and Marketing. She's a key member, she's been described as a key member of our culture and values, and she's in the detail of changing consumer habits every day as part of her role and has a wealth of knowledge as part of this. So please help me make Holly feel very welcome. Please come on up, Holly.
Cool, thank you very much. Hard act to follow someone that does this day in, day out, but I will give it my best shot. So, as Julia mentioned, my name is Holly Lloyd and I'm a Senior Category Manager at Foodstuffs South Island. I've been there for 3.5 years, first 12 months in the produce buying team before moving over to category. Before starting my career in FMCG, I studied a Bachelor of Science down at Otago, majoring in Consumer Food Science with Marketing and Statistics. So to start off with, just wanted to start with a quote that I thought was very appropriate for today and sums up consumer habits over the past 3 years. So the consumer is changing. They're more capricious and less loyal. They have less time but are more conscientious. They shy away from stores and prefer experiences over products. Today's consumer is an entirely different animal and unrecognisable from their peer from the good old days. So over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to cover these 3 topics. So we'll start with the past. Where have our customers jumped forward from in the past 3 years? The present, we can't get away from it, but COVID-19 has and will have an impact on our customers in the short and medium term. And the future, what are the predictions on the long-term outlook for our consumers? So to start with the past, there are many categories examples of how consumer habits have changed over the last 3 years. Diets like paleo and keto, lower to no sugar, functional foods, and indulgent treats. However, there appears to be a few fundamental areas of evolution that span across categories and departments where we have seen the most change. These 3 are plant-based eating, conscious consumerism, and also convenience. So plant-based. Plant-based basically covers a product that is absent of meat and or dairy with a vegetable or pulse-based substitute. It can encompass vegetarian, vegan and flexitarian diets, and it is a global trend that has gained traction everywhere. There are sites, groups, TV shows and whole brands dedicated to plant-based living. While consumers who are already following a vegetarian or vegan diet are significantly contributing to the growth of plant-based foods, given they now have a wider range of options to choose from, this trend is also becoming mainstream. A large proportion of plant-based customers are meat eaters wanting to reduce their intake. Figures suggest that 25% of our customers are actively engaged in doing this. At a total level, plant-based proteins are yet to make a significant impact, but we are seeing high levels of trial. A large portion of plant-based eaters are female, but males still make up over 40% of the customer set. Millennials are the pioneers in vegetarian and vegan-based diets, but baby boomers are leading the charge in reduction in meat consumption. And why are people doing this? There are many reasons, and there may be more than one for some customers. So the main one for a lot of people is health, and that's actively eating more plants or for intolerances they may have developed. For the environment, to have a smaller footprint overall, and for economic reasons, when the price of fish or meat is deemed too high, and value for money continues to be the biggest barrier in red meat consumption. So how much is plant-based actually worth? It is difficult to get exact numbers, but we estimate the plant-based category is now bigger than rice, noodles, pasta and grains combined. This category is still growing at 41%, so our predictions by next year will be nearer to the entire ice cream category. So up on your screen are a few different new products that we've seen launch over the last few years to many success. It's by no means limited to our smaller producers. Our big food producers now see the value in this trend with products from Kellogg's, Unilever and Ingham's, just to name a few. The trend covers numerous categories. As you can see up on the screen, we've got meal solutions, we've got protein substitutes, ice cream, yogurts, mayonnaise. The list just goes on. So on to our next trend of conscious consumerism. It's a very complex topic, complex in terms of the science, but also complex in terms of our customers' approach to it. Sustainability is a large part of this and has now become mainstream in our Foodstuff South Island world. It no longer encompasses a few white box products from smaller eco and green companies. It forms part of our corporate social responsibility. It is a main consideration in our ranging and new product decisions. And it has also become an expectation within some categories and a hygiene factor rather than a point of difference. It's a major point of challenge from our customers to us, amongst ourselves and from us back to our suppliers. We have seen a major shift in focus from customers and suppliers at the grassroots level over the past 3 years. This is no longer about documentaries and political wins, but about integration into our everyday lives. How can I make a difference? How do I impact the planet? And how can I do just a little bit better? Consumers expect these practices to be integrated into business models and not just an add-on. Investing in sustainability is no longer an option, but a customer demand. But what is it and what does it encompass? Basically everything, from conception of a product to its design, through to manufacturing, shipping and disposal. A complete end-to-end transparency. It's no longer just about plastic bags or polystyrene meat trays. And here are just a few examples. So we've got packaging. Yes, it forms the main part, as this is the most visible to the customer. So less of it, better types so that we can recycle it and smart ways of reusing it. The carbon footprint. So where did the product originate? Is it reasonable to come so far? And do we have local alternatives? The end of life. Where will the product end up? Recycled, landfill, or can we reuse it? The soil usage. How does the growth of this product or ingredient enhance the soil as opposed to strip it of its nutrients? Globally, this is becoming more and more of a trend, and it is predicted to become a selling point across products in the next few years. And ethical practices. Was anyone or anything else harmed or used in a negative way in the production or supply of this product? So up here are a few examples of how we at Foodstuff South Island are trying to make a difference. So we've got appropriate home compostable products, better material types for recycling, reduction in water being shipped around the globe. And so examples of this would be shampoo bars or concentrates in household cleaning, local supply, reusable crates throughout our supply chain, and best practice documents encompassing better options for our fresh departments. So these form a major part of our decision making with product ranging, and we are actively replacing the not so good with the better. Sustainability has to be built into the product from conception all the way through rather than add on at the end. High quality food now means more to customers than just its nutrient content. It encompasses sustainable farming, growing practices to protect natural resources, and minimising or utilising food waste. So on to our third one, convenience. Like never before, we are time poor. We have more to do and seemingly less time to do it in. The world has become smaller, but our expectations have become larger. Our customers lead increasing busier lives as the pressure of modern living gets higher. So this has created a new meaning of the word convenience. It used to mean shopping in our local store and getting a nearby park. It now means 24-hour online searching, food when I want it and hot, meals and ingredients prepared and delivered to my door, instant access to high-quality foods in my home, and the most important one for millennials is someone else to do the work for me. So it translates into food delivery companies, not just for ingredients and set meals, but for prepared meals from favourite takeaways and restaurants, meal inspiration in store, continued rise of online shopping, click and collect services, and an upsurge in frozen foods. Even though it's a relatively mature category, the frozen foods department is still in sustained double-digit growth. With better quality offerings and more choice in meal-ready foods, leading innovation and exciting new offerings, the frozen department continues to offer customers the ultimate in food at home convenience. So on to the present and to talk about COVID-19. It has obviously affected us as people across a number of factors. As customers, this is also the case. Changes have occurred in the very short term, such as panic buying, adapting to out of stocks, and changing our actual shopping patterns. It is also predicted to affect us in the here and now, and also in the medium term as we go in and out of lockdowns. The main themes identified as the changes to watch are up here, and this is covered from a Foodstuffs South Island analysis of over 30 pieces of research from suppliers, data partners, and customer interviews. So the big main one that has come out is supporting local, which no doubt everyone has heard about, and this can be from brands to supply chains, retailers, and also supporting your local community. Sensible spending through buying more value-based products, and also from channel switching. We're seeing people move from restaurants and beauty salons into the supermarket for in-home dining and also at-home treatments. Health awareness, from treatment to prevention. Categories such as health supplements and hygiene are still in double-digit growth, and over 30% of consumers still claim to be doing things better well after lockdown has ended. Trust. Brand efficacy is paramount, and therefore claims need to be backed up, double-checked, and checked again. Home-based, people are cooking and baking more at home, and it continues to be a trend that is rising. This also encompasses people working from home, which has challenged many companies' perceptions, and also entertaining from home, which has implications on out-of-home dining. And the online adoption. This has forced prior avoiders online to give it a go and continues to trend up, and this will only increase as we potentially move in and out of lockdowns. In reality, we are still in the midst of this, and we wait to see where this will go and what we find out when we look back in the future. So on to the future and what we can expect moving forward. Corporate social responsibility strategies. So these should be a live working document amongst a business. It gives customers an idea of your priorities, ideals, and aspirations in terms of communities, the planet, the next generation. Millennials and Gen Z demand these as part of their brand and product choice. It is important for them to align with businesses who share the same or similar ethics to them. As a result of this, customers are going to have higher expectations. There's going to be more expectations placed on companies, brands, and products to be honest and open about their internal practices and goals. Consumers will prioritise where and how their money is spent, and the value perception of products and how this aligns with customers' priorities and values will be imperative. And evolving with technology. In a world where technology is readily available, customers have easier access to information that influences their decision-making. Millennials and Gen Z are using this information to make informed decisions that align with their values and morals. It is essential to adapt to developing technologies to keep up with future generations and their growing expectations. So in summary, our future consumer will continue to surprise, excite, confuse, and challenge us. Our job is to figure out pretty damn quick what they want and execute it in a way that meets these ever-changing needs more than they expected, with integrity and excellence in retailing. That's all from me. Look forward to your questions later on, and thank you very much.
Cool, thanks so much for that, Holly. COVID-19 was a really interesting one, wasn't it? That old lockdown, where we saw a huge rise in home baking and the development of the lockdown loaf, of which I'm sure everybody tried, when you couldn't get yeast. Sorry, had to bring that up. But it was a huge shift, and it's incredible to hear from a first-hand experience exactly what happened there. Cool. Introducing our final speaker today, we've got Hamish Guild, who's the operations manager for High Peak Station. So Hamish Guild runs the farming side of High Peak Station, the Guild family property in the headwaters of the Selwyn River, farming deer, cattle and sheep. The business also includes tourism activities managed by other family members, as well as directly exporting products from the property. Studying at Lincoln, was followed by 2.5 years travelling overseas. Seeing how some New Zealand products were sold has shaped the way that Hamish and the Guild family look at their own products and the value that can be created. So please help me welcome Hamish Guild.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, as you can see, I don't have a flash PowerPoint presentation, but after watching Sam's tech failure, I'm pretty happy to have my trusty clipboard. So yeah, first, thank you for the invitation to come and speak. I have to declare I did study at Lincoln and I haven't finished my degree. I took a year off and that was 2002. So yeah, much to my father's amusement particularly, he thought it was with some irony that I was coming back here today to talk. So perhaps one day I'll finish things off. Anyway, I'll give a brief explanation first as to our business structure and what we do as a family, and I think that'll hopefully make things clearer from where my perspective comes from. So at home on High Peak, we're a four-way partnership, which is probably reasonably unusual for a family business. My wife Gemma and I running the farming operation, and that's sheep, beef and deer. The deer are bred for venison, velvet, and for feeding the trophy hunting deer for the tourism operation. My brother Simon and his wife Kate run the tourism operation. That encompasses hunting, fishing. They have a heli skiing business, and we will look to do a lot more general on-farm tourism as well. My brother-in-law Tom, married to my sister Amelia, he runs the beekeeping, the apiarism business at High Peak, and that also utilises a lot of neighbouring properties up our area. Mum and Dad, parents James and Anna, they've kind of assumed the role of the building development program. We're trying to get our infrastructure up to speed over the last few years. And they also have the unenviable job of keeping the peace between their children. So we're also developing an export business, and we want to take our products directly off property, directly to consumers and keep that as close as we can. We all collectively work on our export products, with our area of expertise probably dictating our involvement. So Tom has far more exposure to the honey than I do, but we all work it in together. I also have a distinct passion for seeing better returns in red meat, but at this stage I think we've probably got a few too many things happening, so I think we'll wait. And so most of my perspective directly from consumers actually come from overseas, because that's who we've decided to target in the short term. We intend to sell to New Zealand consumers eventually, but at this stage, as probably all of you know, we're spoiled for choice for high quality options in New Zealand, so in order to hit our price point, we probably have to look offshore. So I was given a list of questions, and I'll try and work through them reasonably sequentially, and I'll probably read those questions to you so you can understand where I've come from on that. One of the areas of discussion was what drives High Peak to be innovative but simplistic in their processes, and it's probably clear from what I've told you about the business, it's not overly simplistic at times. But diversification is something we've certainly embraced, and that's been really driven home to us this year in COVID-19. With the border closure, our tourism business has been hit particularly hard, so instead of actually looking at it as a negative, saying we had too much exposure to tourism, we're actually very happy that we've got a very diversified business. All other farm products were hit particularly hard as well. Probably the next most negatively impacted was venison, and that's probably because it is a restaurant meat rather than a supermarket meat, sold into Europe and America, and as we know, very little retail activity there in the restaurant scene recently. Diversification brings management complications, but our structure probably allows us to deal with that. So that unusual structure of having 4 families on the same property actually has some distinct advantages when you can work through some of those early teething problems. As I said before, we farm at the headwaters of the Selwyn River, which passes close by the campus here. And recently that's been leveraged reasonably hard politically over freshwater issues. So that also is a big driver behind what we do and how we farm. So this makes us very aware of our environmental obligations and probably consumer expectations because of that. And more recently, this has probably morphed away from water and into greenhouse gases and the air. So what drives our innovation? It's probably facing the reality that there really aren't too many other options other than to innovate. Not moving forward is moving backwards, in our opinion, and we can't keep increasing production indefinitely to retain profitability. And I believe this is us as an individual farm, but I also believe that's probably us as a country. We just can't keep putting on more inputs and expecting more outputs. More fertiliser, higher stocking rates, it has to go somewhere. So we have to be better at targeting our products to the right consumers who are willing to pay a premium and getting more from less and chasing value over volume, which is one of our business mantras. The message has been pushed really hard at us as farmers and as businesses to do this, but it's a hell of a lot harder in practice than it is in theory. Our venture into branded exports has taught us this, and one of the companies we work with have been a huge help to us. Paul said to me, it'll be 3 times harder, 3 times more expensive, and take 3 times longer than what you think. So effectively, it's probably a power of 10 harder than before you even get off the start line. And from our couple of years into this foray, I'd absolutely back that up. We try to innovate with export products. So one of those is our cut comb honey. We have a honeycomb which we basically put a sealing on. It comes straight out of the hive. So there's no adulteration. You literally can't touch it, and it's been a really big hit overseas. It can't be blended and it can't have sugar added. It is literally as the bees left it. We're also getting rugs handmade via India using wool directly traceable off the property. And we're using isotope technology to verify that. So by retaining ownership and control of the products as far as we can into the value chain, we actually get as close as we can to the end user. And so we try and avoid selling to someone on the way through. If we can get as close to directly retailing, that's the key for us. How do we keep it simplistic? We rely on the products to tell the story. We also try and keep the products very simplistic. We don't want to overcomplicate them. We try and keep them in their rawest forms. So we actually have an undyed wool rug, which seems to be reasonably popular at the moment, and it's just done on different loop piles and contours in the rug. The actual rug itself is undyed, and people seem to be quite receptive to that. It certainly hasn't had anything like bleach go anywhere near it. Again, the raw honey straight from the comb, you can't adulterate it. People will know it's been capped off by the bees, therefore it's a safe product. My father had a large exposure to probably farming industry politics when he was young, particularly around the dairy industry, and those experiences, probably trying to change farmers and get farmers to act collectively, have actually probably had a huge influence on me. And farmers don't necessarily react well to being told what to do. We're quite individualistic. But if one farmer is doing well, and I've seen this firsthand, whether it's production on farm or as someone opens a key market, it's hard to hold the rest back. Everyone wants a piece of the action. So basically the way we've tackled it is if we can solve a problem, we'd like to bring people along with us. We'd like to scale up. Some travelling overseas to some high-value markets, especially countries with little agricultural production, has definitely shaped the way I think too. And often a lot of New Zealand products over there were branded like they were trying to sell to New Zealanders rather than trying to bring in external expertise and target those markets. So that's something we haven't been afraid to utilise either. How have we diversified on farm? I've probably covered a lot of that. By having multiple distinct income streams, not only the mix of stock classes, sheep, beef and deer, we're varied there, but also the tourism and the honey as well. And export has given us the key basically to adding the value we hope to. It's given us control of what we do, and so we used to be a store property selling to someone else who would finish our stock, and we were just a price taker on that front. So less production at a higher value made sense to us. Again, in theory, this is a great idea. So ideally, it'll give us an opportunity to be less intensive and more profitable. And again, that is theory. We'd love to prove that. When I first came home to the farming system, it was a large-scale breeding property, and commodity prices at the time meant we were unprofitable, basically. We weren't making money. And I remember having a distinctly blunt conversation with our farm advisor, who was distinctly blunt, and he said, if you keep doing what you're doing, you'll go broke. So in many ways, we only had one option. We couldn't keep doing what we were doing. So in an export sense, what we're trying to do is probably take some non-traditional products into non-traditional markets. And by that, I mean some of the markets where New Zealand has focused very hard in the past, we're looking in a slightly different direction. And basically the tourism, when we get that up and running properly, we're hoping to build a lodge on the property that'll close the loop. So people will actually be able to come and see what we do. It won't just be a case of telling a good story. We'll invite people in and they can come and live it. How have we diversified on farm to better fit consumer demands? Well, we can either take signals off our larger trading export companies that we still deal with and trust that they're directly interfacing with the consumer. Or we do it through our export channels where we are directly interfacing with the consumer. So we get some different feedback on that at times. The Deer Velvet products, it ticks a number of boxes. We heard Holly talking about health products. Some of those Deer Velvet products are really exciting to a health-conscious consumer. And obviously more and more consumers want to know the true identity of the products, but also the people behind them. I find a lot more people are getting on a website now, and that link that used to be in the corner about us, it's becoming probably one of the first clicks on a page that people go to. They want to make sure you're not greenwashing and telling them a story. If consumers move away from meat consumption, then we have to meet that by competing in a different space to the alternatives. Farming properties like ours, put simply, are a very good place to grow red meat. Climatically, we would struggle to grow a lot of other proteins. We'd also run the risk of, with the soils that we're on, cultivation turning it into a dust bowl. So we have to stick with what we're good at. We can't swim against the tide. At the same time, I think there is a very relevant niche for meat, but it'll be at probably a different place from where we've traded it originally. And if this is done within positive environmental constraints, and we have to do this a lot better as an industry to sell, then it becomes a very compelling selling point as well. We also have to be wary that it's easy for consumers to tell us what they want to do to conform to their demands, and they may not be willing to pay for it. So that's a big issue that we have. We have to be confident that they are willing to pay the cost difference that it'll take us to get there. How have we found farming practices encouraging buyer behaviour? Easily, the negative ones are the most easy to identify. The backlash can be very swift and can permanently change and alter our farming practices. We're seeing this through something like winter grazing at the moment. It's very easy for us to get judged by our poorest 2 or 3%. It's much harder to sell positive news stories, as we all know bad news sells. And New Zealand judges its own agricultural, from what I've seen, its own ag industry very harshly compared to foreigners. Most of the world that I have the privilege of being in discussion with can't believe some of the news stories that come out of New Zealand in reference to our agriculture. It's not to say we can't do better, as we all know we always can, but I think that's a real risk to our current reasonably good status overseas. Consumers want to make sure that we are who we say we are, and that goes back to what we were saying before. They actually want to really get to know us. The more this is trusted and thoroughly audited, the more confidence they have in our ability to buy. So that probably adds a layer of cost, that auditing process, but we have to be able to more than offset that. How can we connect consumers to our story? Basically by telling it. And again, in practice, this can be really difficult. But as an industry, particularly livestock farming, we've been far too quiet for too long. We've stuck our heads in behind the gate and we've worked hard, and we haven't really welcomed people in. And consequently, a camera over the fence can tell a really misleading story. So we're starting to be a lot more proactive now in ensuring that we're being judged, not being judged by our weakest performers. Social media is big for this, being able to give people a window into your system. It's very ironic that I say that because I'm a complete Philistine on social media. And we have to sell our positive aspects rather than letting those negative headlines dominate. So we have to own the story. Exposing consumers to the production systems by getting them on farms, another great way to do it. And that may not necessarily be boots and mud. It may be a virtual way of getting them in. So in our case, we intend to have consumers stay on the farm, and we're not going to put things on for them for the day. We are going to go about our business and do what we do and say, come and have a look. And for a lot of people, that's reasonably fascinating. How can we collaborate and use innovative practices in order to optimise our land use as well as improving perceived and actual value of the products we create? I'm not sure who gave me that question because it gave me headaches trying to answer it. A national strategy, I think, is a definite option, and it's something I've heard about. I'm not close enough to the Primary Sector Council, but I understand they've done a fair bit of work to this effect. Where probably all New Zealand products, brand NZ is far more visual. Cooperatives can have their place for collective selling, but I've also seen them run the risk that they have to buy products off shareholders at that point, and that can make them a soft seller as well. River catchment groups are a great way for local farms to get together in an area to actually solve a problem, but also create a really positive news story as well. As I said before, most farmers are individualistic by nature, and we don't naturally come together collectively, where we seem to compete quite hard. And perceived and actual value, as we know, are largely the same thing. As they say, perception is reality. So, we have to make sure we can deliver on that. Farmers are good at taking on innovation. That's one thing we are very good, and that's one thing Lincoln has been hugely beneficial for. If a new technology comes out, and certainly if there's a dollar in it, people will just take it up straight away. And equally, economic forces can distort this, and we've probably seen that with dairying a few years ago being pushed onto some marginal land it should never have gone onto, just because the economics were worthwhile. But generally, farmers and innovations go hand in hand. So finally, what effect have consumer demands had on the way our farm operates? There's a number of them, but high-peak stock class ratios remain relatively static because they actually suit the property. So we don't chase trends overly hard. One example is our cattle ratio is being decreased at the moment, and this is largely a direct result of what we're seeing coming in with waterways and having to fence off. So sometimes it's actually hard to figure out whether this is consumers truly demanding it or it's a political agenda. Either way, we will have to comply, basically. We get our water tested at 6 different sites throughout the property, so we actually have a reasonably good handle on our individual impact, and that's spread over the 3 or 4 properties in our catchment. Electronic tagging, resource consents, farm environment plans, overseer, water testing, carbon sequestration budgets, sediment loss and increased bureaucracy are all some of the issues that have come in my time farming, probably not Dad's, although I'm sure he would say that increased bureaucracy is just a constant. So our farming practices are far more visual than they were, and particularly around animal welfare. These demands can cause major changes, but we also have to adapt to them because we think that, as we know, change is a constant. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much for that, Hamish. I think about through the middle of what you were saying, it was pragmatic marketing at its finest, and that you were saying you had diversification in response to changing consumer preferences while you were controlling the value chain to ensure you actually knew what your customers wanted. And I think all too often people are coming up with products that they think respond to what people need, and it's not quite the case, but I think that's absolutely fantastic. So we have got some questions on Zoom, and I'm sure we've got some questions in the audience. So would our speakers like to come and take a seat? Cool, just to give you a quick recap of, so we had Samantha White, who is our lecturer in marketing at the very prestigious Lincoln University, who shared her perspective regarding any major shifts in consumer preferences, both in New Zealand and around the globe. Then we had Holly Lloyd, who is a senior category manager at Foodstuffs South Island, who spoke about her view on changing consumption habits of consumers based in Aotearoa, New Zealand, especially in light of what's been happening in the last few months. And then we have just had Hamish Guild, Operations Manager at High Peak Station, who answered a lot of our questions. I must confess that hard one wasn't from me. It was from my colleague Katie down the end there, who provided insight into what's driving High Peak Farms to be innovative. So I know we do have a question here on Zoom, so I'm just going to read that out to all of our speakers. How do the speakers see Te Taio being effectively implemented to achieve the premium New Zealand product that has been mentioned? Anyone want to take a punt on that one? Don't all shout at once. In terms of, I think, so it's from Nicole there, in terms of the environment being the root of life, in terms of the Māori perspective. Does anyone have any thoughts on that one or want to address?
Can you have the question again, sorry?
Yeah, so how do the speakers see Te Taio being effectively implemented to achieve the premium New Zealand product that has been mentioned?
It's a hard one.
Yeah.
I guess one of us would have to have a crack. Yeah, probably the least qualified. It does refer to some of the things I was saying where I guess it's a holistic view of the whole country, perhaps a brand strategy for the whole country, and I think that could probably be quite powerful in amongst that, but I have to admit I don't, not too familiar with the concept, so I'll have to do a bit of research.
No, I think in terms of doing well by doing good, I think that is absolutely summed up in what you've just said there. Cool. Do we have any questions in the audience over Melissa?
So it kind of occurs to me that across all your presentations we're sort of in a reactionary method, and I can empathise being a farmer myself, that's sort of the nature of the beast, no pun intended. But even in the research around sort of now we're mainstream plant-based, that's kind of historically looking or what is currently happening, and you kind of said we need to get faster at responding. How do you propose, like, how we will prepare, if the world's moving faster, which I would say, you even spoke about the last 3 years as how the consumers are changing, which 10 years ago would be the last 20 years, right? So how do we propose to be less reactionary and more participatory maybe in and preparing ourselves for what's next? So if veganism is the current movement, what's next? And are we going to continue to be reactionary, or how do you propose that we put systems in place to be better prepared or participatory in that sort of movement of speed?
I think in terms of being less reactionary, you can put things in place in terms of being more connected with customers. I mean, obviously, we're not going to know what customers want until after they've told us they want them. Anticipating needs is really hard. But one of the easier ways we can do that is making sure that we're talking to our customers regularly. We have those touch points in place. Like I think a few of us have mentioned that social media does seem to be this really fast-paced thing. And so making sure you do have those channels and that you are engaging with them, because that's how consumers are getting access to information, and that's if you are across that and you are using that information in your own business, and that's going to make it at least a shorter time span between finding out what they want and being able to implement it. I don't think I have any advice on knowing what the sort of future needs will be.
Yeah, to build on what Sam said, it's the customer's needs and wants are changing daily, and we see so many trends even in 1 year. So it's almost picking and choosing those trends and what suits you and your business rather than trying to chase them all, because there's a lot of different types of customers and customers are very diverse. So what suits one customer group won't suit another. So making sure that those trends that are around, picking and choosing the ones that you want to chase and want to go and be successful in.
Still like chasing them as opposed to sort of building a framework that's less reactionary. Is that sort of what you're thinking is the future?
To keep up with the customer's changing needs, yes, but don't stray too far from your core morals and values of a business, because that's what customers at the end of the day are wanting. They're wanting to know more about the company and more about the business and where the products have come from. And we're seeing more and more, as Hamish mentioned, QR codes and tracing apps, and people are taking it back right to the hives of bees and that kind of thing. So they're wanting to know from the very, very start of the process right to the very end, and even past the process in terms of packaging, on where that packaging is going to end up and that whole transparency. Even some things customers are just getting back to basics on, and it's not too complicated.
No, I wouldn't add too much other than, yeah, it's very hard not to be reactionary. Sitting in this position, we are largely dictated to. So we have to try and keep up, and I think Holly said it quite right. We have to hold our ground on some areas and probably try and adapt where we can. Again, we're in a biological system, so there's limits to how fast we can move.
Tell you what, if there was a silver lining to come from the COVID situation, it is the prevalence of QR codes making a comeback, hey? Everyone's got a scanner on their phone. It's been huge in China since forever. But finally, now that people are using them every day anyway, let's put it back on products to talk about provenance. Amazing. We've got a question here on Zoom, an anonymous attendee. The conscious consumer and environmental implications were prominent across all presentations. Have you noticed an increase in conversation surrounding organic regen ag to be a potential solution to that?
Yes. Yep, put simply. I'm not quite sure where we sit on those again. So for us personally as a business, we've absolutely explored them. We will probably go organic with the beehives. There's some limitations to both regen and organics for us as a whole property, and certainly regenerative. There's a lot more I need to learn. I'm fascinated by the concept. I think there's still maybe a few holes, and probably some people on campus here who'd agree with me with that, and the science behind it. And I'd like to be a first mover, but I'm probably not quite on the first wave. I like to watch someone else go a little bit ahead first. It quite often saves a bit of money.
So a couple of things. So in the meat substitute research, we did find that even though motivations are around health and the environment, if GE ingredients were used, then that kind of contradicted that. So I think there is demand there for more natural or organic inputs into those products. And also for the meat reduction itself, we kind of saw that people were spending less money on meat overall, so they were willing to invest more in organic, free-range products. So I think there would be demand from the organic area. I'm not sure about regenerative farming though.
Yeah, and in terms of the supermarket, we're seeing more organic and more natural products come onto the scene. Customers are wanting to, again, as I said before, know what's in their food and understand the back of the pack, and so they know what they're putting in their body. Customers are getting more and more clever about different types of ingredients and how they fuel themselves. So, yeah, organic is definitely a trend we're seeing.
I don't think we're going to have an event where regen ag doesn't make an appearance in our questions list. Who knows? Maybe. Do we have a question in the audience back there?
Oh, thank you. Hamish, I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about your distribution models, your supply chains, and how you are achieving your direct-to-consumer model.
Yeah, we're still at a very early stage, so I'd absolutely say that. We've had some reasonably good success, and a lot of it's by luck. It's just by being out there and eventually finding a person that will fit what we need them to do. I guess you have to kiss a few frogs before you find a princess, and we've kissed a few. We've kissed a lot. But yeah, with honey, it is a very simple chain. We work with a retailer very directly who prominently displays our brand. And so there's no one else involved. With the wool and carpets, it's a very similar model. It's actually a collaboration, that one. So we actually do lose some ownership of that product as it goes through that. But again, it's a very transparent chain. It's a bit longer, that one, because it has to go via India to be hand woven and then back to the US. So there is a cost to that distribution channel there. And again, Deer Velvet, the products there, we're trying to go as keep that chain as short as possible and be as direct as possible. It's very easy just to find yourself a raw product supplier very quickly, and we've had to be pretty disciplined to make sure we don't fall into that trap. Did that answer the question? Is that...
I think we had another question. Valerie at the front.
Thank you. Between Holly and Sam, we saw some conflicts in what you were saying in terms of trade-offs, that we have some brands people trust, like Linda McCartney, Corn, Beyond Burgers. They're international, yet carbon footprint is important. Support local, but we have that's higher cost generally, but sensible spending. We have support local, and then wanting the home-based convenience, where we know Uber Eats takes 35% off hospitality. So we can't be all things to all people. We can't be. Do we know anything about the relative rankings per segment? You know, like, you know, what are the importance weights that the middle-aged mom has in terms of going into the marketplace as opposed to the millennial going into the marketplace? Do we know what their relative, what they're looking for?
A simple answer, no. Mainly just because every customer has different needs and wants and will prioritise things differently. So, and also across different categories. So for me, I might prioritise in my fruit and veg and meat to always support local, but in ambient grocery and packaged goods, I just might want the best value offering. So it changes across customers and also across categories and how their value perception is. So some customers may be happy to spend an extra couple of dollars for organic, New Zealand, free range, a more premium product, whereas other customers want to pay the same price for all of those. And it depends on whether it is in that fresh, chilled, frozen, or in the ambient grocery categories. So unfortunately, it's not probably the answer you're after, but different customers, different categories, different needs.
I think you're right. I think it is a trade-off, and particularly during COVID, there was a big movement towards support local. But I think now that we're out of lockdown, that tended to be more around a hospitality rather than, say, the products I'm buying from the shelf. Not so much produce, but like meat substitutes in particular. We do have some in New Zealand, but the range isn't huge. So, like, if you want the Beyond Burger, like, you have to accept that it's coming from the United States. And yeah, I mean, food miles did come up in the research, but it tends to be more around like fresh food, like produce and meat, rather than packaged goods. I'm not sure why that perception exists, but yeah, you're right, it does depend on the individual consumer. I think millennials tend to value convenience a bit more, and they're quite selective on the types of businesses that they will support local for, like dining out with friends and things like that, but like in terms of shelf-stable products, not so much.
And supporting local can mean different things to everyone as well.
Yeah.
So it may be buying a fully New Zealand product, and then others it's that there's supply chains throughout New Zealand as well. So a company's importing all the ingredients and making products here to then sell to New Zealand. So that's still a local company, a local business, jobs within our country. So it can mean different things to different people as well.
Yeah, it's very messy. Like, Hal Pizza's a local business, but the Beyond Burger that they import from the States on the pizza, it's like, well, you're kind of supporting local, but not really, because it's a mess.
Excellent. I think we've got time for maybe two or three more questions. We'll start at the back and make our way forward.
I think a question for you, Samantha. You mentioned that health concerns are one of the drivers towards plant-based meat alternatives. Did you get any insight into consumers' perceptions of the degree of processing in some of these plant-based meats alternatives, and what potential impact that might have on health? I mean, to me, it seems as if a lot of them have been processed within an inch of their life, and are probably quite likely a lot less nutritious than what they're supposed to be replacing.
Again, it comes down to the consumer. So not all vegans care about their health. I identify as a junk food vegan. And so from the environmental and ethical perspective, I would go with a meat-free diet, but like I am going to indulge in Ben & Jerry's and my Beyond Burger on occasion. But there are some consumers who are more concerned about their health, so they're going to go for more whole foods, plant-based diet, as opposed to those that incorporate meat substitutes. But within the meat substitute market, there is a spectrum. So the Impossible Burger is probably the most processed, but then Bean Supreme is just mashed up vegetables in a patty shape. So I think something like that is probably more likely to appeal to a health-concerned plant-based eater, whereas if someone's going to order, Hal Pizza, they're probably not as concerned about their health. That includes me. So it is a variety, and the perception is that for some of these products, they are highly processed, and nutritional content is obviously important in terms of protein and iron content. But a lot of the packaging does tend to sort of communicate those sorts of values as well, and there has been research done on the relative comparison. It's never going to be exact, but I think generally they do, like Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger have been manufactured to replace meat like that, whereas some of the other products maybe like iron and protein like components aren't as prevalent, and they're still high, but they haven't been designed to replicate meat nutritionally to the same extent.
Cool. I think we've got time for two more. One here.
Holly, I had a question for you. So you talked a lot about integrated sustainability and transparency across all parts of a product and supply chain. So I was wondering if Foodstuffs was going to start aiming to achieve one of these transparent certifications, such as B Corp, not just for yourself, but also for your suppliers.
So I'm not 100% over whether or not we will look to a B Corp certified standard. I know that we do have a few suppliers who are going through that process. It's very, very lengthy process. But in terms of Foodstuffs South Island, we've recently refined our corporate social responsibility strategy document, and then also on that we've got our goals of having, believe it's by the end of 2025, to have all of our packaging, which includes our own private label, as either recyclable materials or reusable materials as well. So there are a lot of projects in place, and what we're pushing back on our suppliers we are backing that up ourselves and making sure that our private label products also follow and meet those needs and standards. And if there isn't an alternative, we will look to exit. If we can't come up with a solution, we will look to exit those different categories.
Cool. I think we have one last question up front.
Thanks, guys. This is probably to the panel as a whole. In terms of social media chatter, I'll call it, and actual consumer spending or purchasing patterns, when you are making decisions, which do you take most notice of and why? So in terms of whether Holly, you were just talking about whether or not you might exit a particular product range, but also in terms of decisions for you, Hamish, on farm, how do you make decisions based on what I will call chatter, as opposed to real actual purchasing power and purchasing activity?
So for us, the social media activity comes a lot from our suppliers, and it can gain a lot of traction with product launches and making sure that customers know what products are available and why customers should buy them and all the benefits about the product. So when we are looking at a new product and looking at the social media strategy that the suppliers have, we take into account what the product is, what category it's in, and also the supplier as well in terms of that social media, because we've seen a lot of launches recently where social media has been very, very successful for them, and it's gotten as you say, the chatter. People are talking about it online, and it's gaining momentum and gaining traction, and people are aware of the products. Other products do suit more traditional media, whether that's TV or billboard advertising and that kind of thing as well. So there is a lot of people are moving towards social media, and it can be a great way to get your story out there without having to go on TV and tell your whole story. But social media is a great way of getting customers to understand you as a brand, as a business, and what you stand for.
Yeah, I guess on top of that, our main signal is going to be that retail signal. That is the consumer's voice themselves, what they want to purchase. The chatter is not something I'm particularly good at, but as a business, we do have a reasonable bit of chatter, and I guess we take quite a softly approach to it. We don't get overly political and antagonistic on some of the issues, so we just try and explain to people what we do rather than risk some of that negative chatter that comes with it, and then the people who on the opposite spectrum as well. So I'm the least qualified person probably in the whole world to talk to you on that, but it's something we are aware of, and it does help us with what we do, but ultimately it's those probably buying purchases seem to come through a bit louder.
I can add to that if you want. So from a consumer side, the vegan community in particular have extensive sort of local and domestic networks, but they are in closed groups, and so brands who aren't engaged in those groups aren't going to see it. But for example, last week Sara Lee released a vegan chocolate Bavarian cheesecake, and someone posted on the group saying there are like 6 left at Durham Street, New World as of 12 p.m. Wednesday or something. And there were almost live updates, people going into store being like, okay, there are 4 left at 3 p.m. I went on the weekend and there were none left, and I was gutted. So we do see in some instances where it is almost like a running commentary of like where you can source products from. Another example was the Natural Confectionery Company released vegan, I've had 2 packets already, vegan jellies, and it is that running commentary of like, guys, like this brand has released this product, this is where I've seen it, and someone else goes, oh yeah, I'm in Christchurch and I've seen it at these stores. And it is that on the ground, local, like this is where you can source products, because as vegans we are desperate to try everything. So yeah, it can have quite real implications for sales in that context.
It's almost like an auction process.
You've got to be quick or you miss out.
I guess in terms of social media as well, people are maybe talking about your brand or your product, but not necessarily talking to you about it on social media. So stuff like Hootsuite sentiment analysis is fantastic if anyone's seen that, where you can actually have a little stalk through the public domain on what's around and see what people are saying and what their sentiment is without necessarily mentioning at B-Link or at whatever. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate each of you coming to speak today. I know it's a massive task coming in all the way into Lincoln, especially for you, Sam. So want to say a massive thank you. And thank you guys all for coming in person and our friends on Zoom as well. We've got our next Vibe event coming up shortly. If you consider yourself quite a clever clogs or would like to show off how competitive you are, this is the night for you. So we've got a quiz night coming up, prizes up for grabs, some drinks are on us, and it's just a nice way to get to know the people in our local precinct and also just shake off the last couple of months. We've made it through 2020, whoa! So I think we can celebrate that. Register on Eventbrite or on our site. If you haven't been here before, we've got a co-working space. If you want to try it out, feel free to ask one of the staff members down the back. We've got Vim, Carolyn and Katie who will take you on a tour. We've got some of our tenants here today who I'm sure will speak very highly of us. And that's it. That's everything. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to put your presentations together. I really appreciate it and sticking around for questions. And thank you all for coming. We'll see you next time.